Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Ciobanu. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director of the Nikolić Peace Foundation and the Project Coordinator of Reverse the Trend, NAPF's Youth Initiative. And I would like to welcome everyone to our event on the Trinity Test, Dawn of the Nikolić, and its enduring global implications. Before we begin, I would like to briefly talk about the Nikolić Peace Foundation. We at NAPF educate and advocate for a just and peaceful world, one that is free of nuclear weapons. Founded in 1982, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3 organization with consultative status to the UN Economic and Social Council. We're based both in Santa Barbara and New York, where we work on advancing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and other nuclear disarmament, nuclear justice, and peace initiatives. We're also a proud member of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. As explained by ICAN in its recent publication, before the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States bombed its own people. Trinity was the code name for the first ever use of a nuclear weapon. The plutonium bomb exploded at the El Gordo bombing range in New Mexico on the 16th of July, 1945, was the same design as the one used a few weeks later against Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which led to the deaths of at least 70,000 people. The bomb used to kill 140,000 people at Hiroshima was the uranium bomb. The bombing in New Mexico was labeled a test, but this doesn't convey the destructive power and the harm the nuclear explosion unleashed on the people living in the vicinity. It was not an unpopulated region, as often claimed, and as portrayed in the 2023 film Oppenheimer, and the environment. Fallout from the explosion, which we'll hear later on, reached 46 states throughout the US and spread to Canada and Mexico. On this note, I believe that it's appropriate for us to take a moment of silence to recognize the victims and their descendants who have suffered from the nuclear test. So let's just take a moment to honor, to recognize these victims. Please. Thank you. And on this note, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Mary Dixon, who's a writer, journalist, activist, and Downwinder. Please, Mary, you have the floor. We can't hear you. You're muted, Mary.
Got it. Am I unmuted?
We can hear you now.
Great. Okay, Christian, thank you. And thanks so much for including me on this afternoon's panel to explore the legacy of Trinity, which, as you said, unleashed the nuclear age, an age from which humanity has never recovered. Trinity, though, was just the world's first detonation of an atomic bomb. Of course, it was followed by the actual use of that bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But during the Cold War arms race that followed, more than 2,000 tests were conducted by nuclear nations worldwide, more than half of those by the US, including the detonation of its most powerful hydrogen bombs in the Marshall Islands. A war does not have to be declared for it to have casualties. When I consider the countless people around this country and worldwide who've been harmed all along the nuclear chain, from weapons development and production to 4 decades of nuclear testing, as well as waste storage, the human and environmental toll is catastrophic. It's impossible to know how many lives have been destroyed and how much land poisoned. But I do know that the Cold War arms race had far more casualties than will ever be acknowledged. And I'm one of those casualties. I'm what we call a downwinder, a survivor of hundreds of nuclear blasts in the desert of Nevada on our own soil that devastated my family and childhood neighborhood, as well as communities across this country. Between 1951 and 92, the US government detonated 928 nuclear bombs at the Nevada test site, 928. exposing populations downwind again and again to radioactive fallout. I don't like to call them tests. It's far too innocuous a word. I call them what they are. They were actual detonations of nuclear bombs. And as children growing up in Salt Lake City, we played in puddles of rainwater. We mixed sugar and vanilla with snow and ate it to pretend it was ice cream. We ate vegetables from the garden, and we drank milk delivered to our doorstep every morning from a nearby dairy. How were any of us to know that a silent poison was threading through our bodies when the government repeatedly assured us there is no danger and actually distributed pamphlets telling us not to let reports of Geiger counters going crazy bother us? We lived under the deadly clouds of radioactive fallout from 100 bombs exploded in the open air until 1963 in the test ban, and 828 more detonated underground until 1992. And some of those broke through the Earth's crust and spewed tons of radioactive earth miles into the atmosphere as well. Meteorologists had warned that the winds blow from the west to the east in the U.S., and those winds carried radioactive fallout, as they predicted, across the entire country, where it was measured as far away as upstate New York and even Canada. I like to show, sorry, I don't have it on the screen, this map of where it went by Richard Miller. And when those radioactive particles collided with rain or snow and fell to the earth, they worked their way into the ecosystem, the food chain, and our bodies, which meant that communities across the U.S. became the collateral damage of the arms race. In my late 20s, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Surgeons removed my thyroid and lymph nodes around it. Then they gave me what they called a radioactive cocktail to drink to destroy remaining cancer cells. And a doctor would stand outside my door every day to point his Geiger counter at me until readings were low enough that I could safely be around people again. But before I was discharged, I was warned not to be around pregnant women or small children for a while and not to get pregnant for a year. But I never could have children. Tumors a few years later led to a hysterectomy, and I have had other health complications and other surgeries as well. So I always say I've been sliced, radiated, scooped out. I've buried and mourned the dead. I've comforted and advocated for the living, and worried with each pain, ache, and lump that my cancer's coming back. And I still was one of the lucky ones. I survived. My older sister and others weren't as fortunate. Before my sister died, when she was just 46, of lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, we counted 54 people in our childhood neighborhood who had cancer, tumors, autoimmune disorders, and other illnesses that ravaged them and their families. There were also miscarriages and children born with birth defects. I had a grade school friend who died when we were 10 of a brain tumor. 4 weeks later, her 4-year-old brother died of testicular cancer. And their devastated mother later told me that she asked the pediatrician at the time if it was a coincidence that 10 other people in our neighborhood had brain tumors as well. But those casualties never stop. My younger sister now battles intestinal cancer that, when I called her last week, told me it has now been found in her bladder, her breast, and her brain. And of the Downwinders I work most closely with in Utah, I am the only one that's still alive. One of them always said, you know, we're veterans of the Cold War, only we never enlisted, and no one will ever fold a flag over our coffins. And the legacy of suffering, and I have to stress this, it did not end when the explosion stopped. People are still being diagnosed. Their cancers return. They suffer from health complications. They face crippling medical bills. Many people have been bankrupted as a result. But the psychological damage, like our scars, runs deep. And the genetic damage we know now can be passed to the next generations. This is the true legacies of Oppenheimer's bomb. And what really is hard for me is that most Americans, including our elected officials, don't understand this nuclear heritage, how far fallout spread, and and how they themselves may have been affected. Because, as I always say, the vast majority of downwinders will never know they are. Because when cancers can show up years or decades after exposure, it's hard to connect those dots. If we'd become ill or died immediately following those blasts, it would have been a national catastrophe, and people would have demanded an immediate end to testing. But if cancers can show up 20, 30, or 40 years later, we become invisible. And I have written for decades and spoken about the legacy of nuclear weapons. I've worked with survivors across the country to raise public awareness and to push for justice. So I've heard in this time countless heart-wrenching stories from other survivors of Trinity, which, as Christian said, there were communities downwind, of testing in the Pacific, of tests in Nevada, of uranium miners, of people who worked or lived near contaminated sites where uranium was processed, where plutonium was produced, or waste was stored. And always they tell of endless suffering, of loss and grief. But each one of those stories represents hundreds, even thousands more. And they all echo the stories of survivors worldwide. And while recounting our stories is incredibly painful, it's absolutely urgent that we continue to bear witness to the enormous price we've paid for the sake of nuclear deterrence, which I love that Melissa Park of ICANN called it terrorism. Call it what it is. It was terrorism. And when I get discouraged, because this can be very discouraging work, my cousin who lost her husband to colon cancer always reminds me, your story didn't end tragically, so that you can carry the tragic story forward. And I do feel an incredible responsibility, like other downwinders do, to keep our stories alive. They're not relics of the past. They're very much a part of our shared ongoing reality. And we suffered, and we continue to suffer because of the reckless actions of a government that knew from the beginning the lethal and lasting effects of radiation, but in the race to claim nuclear superiority, sacrificed its own citizens. As I've said, we've struggled decades for recognition and justice. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act of 1990 finally provided compensation for survivors in a handful of counties, but it was always far too limited. We pushed legislation for years that would include more of those who were affected. And that expansion, surprisingly, was included in the big, I will not call it beautiful, budget bill that was signed into law this past July 4th. It's the biggest expansion we've seen. It was long overdue. But while my family and I and thousands of other downwinders in the Southwest, as well as more uranium miners and workers, are finally eligible for compensation, it's a very bittersweet victory. Is there any real justice when thousands of communities are still excluded and their needs remain unaddressed? When so many people have already died waiting and more will continue to die? And most painful of all, no amount of compensation will ever bring back what we've lost or the loved ones we've buried. And I have to ask this, is there justice now as we mark the 80th anniversary of Trinity and the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that we unbelievably find ourselves on the brink of a new and more dangerous arms race? We've watched global tensions flare. We've seen nuclear nations investing more money than ever to build up their arsenals with obscenely more powerful weapons. And we also know that preparations are already underway for the possible resumption of testing. I just have to ask, have we learned nothing from the tragedies of the past? That's why it is more critical than ever that those of us who know firsthand the tragic consequences of nuclear weapons stand in solidarity to bear witness and to demand that the mistakes of the past not be repeated. Our voices, our insights, our perspectives are as important as those of policymakers, think tanks, and weapons experts. And we really need to be part of any discussion of nuclear policy so that we take these weapons out of the detached realm of the abstract by driving home the very real consequences they have on actual human beings. Our lived experience serves as a powerful reminder of what's at stake for all of us. Nuclear weapons, which can never be used and do not make the world safer, must not be part of our future. We can't undo what's already happened, but we can do all we can to ensure that populations worldwide are never again deemed expendable and that future generations never have to live with the same consequences and fears we've endured. The ultimate justice for me is to at last bring the nuclear age to an end. Because if we've learned anything from our experience as survivors of nuclear weapons, it is this: we all live downwind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your powerful remarks and for reminding us that we need to learn from the past. We've been, in our Nikolić Peace Foundation, we've been very concerned about the possible resumption of nuclear testing and what it means, or how that will affect the world, actually, and the fallout. Next, we will hear from Esther Yazzie-Lewis, who's a Diné elder from the Navajo First Nation, and also co-author of The Navajo People and Uranium Mining. And I'm very grateful that she has taken the time out of her busy day to be with us and to share her thoughts. Please, Professor Yazzie-Lewis.
Yad I see Susan Gordon on there. Wonderful. Some people, I was looking through the list to see who I recognize, and Susan's the only one that I see. But anyway, I just want to say thank you, Christian, and to the people who did reverse the trend for nuclear radiation or uranium not being used for nuclear weapons, and the treaty that passed, and listening to Mary Dixon and her story. That's our story as Navajo people. We have the same story. I went to Africa, to Mali, and Bamako, and the goat herders there. I said, that's my story. That's our story. So there are people all around the world who tell the same story, who are affected by uranium mining, who are affected by radiation and exposure of waste, and you name it, all of the above. And so I really appreciate Christian for asking me to come back on. And also, our times are a little different. I'm here in the Mountain Standard and he's out on the East Coast. And I woke up at 2 o'clock the other morning and he said, are you going to join us? And I was like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He emailed me, but I answered him at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I feel that these issues are important to continue to, we talk together, we share with each other our stories. I know that the Native women up there in Nevada who fought against this. I can't remember their names right off the top of my head right now, but I can see them. And they have passed on, they're gone, and so many people that have worked on these issues have gone on, and here we are coming up saying the same thing. History repeats itself. Nothing never changes, it seems like. When we hear our administration say drill, 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 or mine, 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 it's like, when do we ever get some level of relief? And listening to Navajo people and others in the Southwest talk about radiation reclamation, uranium reclamation, and just seeing email, seeing write-ups, it's just a continuous episode of just hard dealing and fighting and being active warriors out there trying to fight all of this. And I thank Christian for it. I thank the youth for it, because I came on their agenda some years back, and I feel really good because they asked me if I could be their advisor, and I say, I'm just a Navajo lady that feels like there's a need and things that need to be talked about and that are affecting my own people, and the devastation and the trauma and the fear of, our water being polluted, our land being polluted, open mines that aren't even fixed, and yet new mining is coming through, the Superfund that didn't really do anything for us. And I just think about, the people, and my heart goes out to the people. And I find I had a brother that used to work in the mine up in Mexican Hat, Utah, and so I've met a lot of miners, and I did all the translation of the miners that worked in the Navajo land and up in the Four Corners area with Doug Brugge, and we wrote the book Navajo People and Uranium Mining. And so there are other documents that have been put out there regarding the effects of uranium on Navajo people. One is, it's just, you try to keep the word going, you try to keep moving, and I know Susan does that with Redwater Pond Road with the Navajo people, and that's a spill that happened in 1979 with wastewater, and I wanted to go, but because of my illness, I was told you need to just stay home and try to get well. Maybe you can go next year, but I did miss the people this year, and I always try to be there to encourage the people to continue to fight for their land and their ways of life and sustaining themselves. And I work with Toronto, a group out of there called Pegasus Institute, and we're talking about sustainability and world health from these impacts of uranium. That's where I come in from, is the uranium impact that we have, and with Navajo people, and knowing that we just have to continue to do this and trying to teach other young people that they have to step up as young warriors to do these things. So I really, really appreciate all of you for doing this, and all of you who are interested. I see some young people from different race on the list here in our group. I encourage you to continue to research, look, however we can find solutions, or, climate change is here. We're living in a lot of fires. We're living in a lot of rain. And I just feel like we're living in the time of a new beginning. We did it to ourselves as scientists, as researchers, as, corporate world, and some of us that are community members are the victims, and we've endured so much, and we still endure so much. And I'm working with the Ohio State University on some issues of blackout. And I think to myself, we never had electricity. We don't even have running water. We don't even have our roads paved. We're like way out there in the boonies, and people, we don't even have internet. A lot of our students that go to school in these native community colleges on the Navajo reservation have to go drive up a hill just so they get internet. We don't have that privilege. And so we live in a rich country. We live in the United States of America. In 1492, people came and took the land, and we're still hauling our water and hauling our wood, and it's horrible. We're not recognized. We're not a part of this country. We're like a country living in another country. And so I have a hard time with our state legislatures, our congressional people, the whole United States government, state governments, and tribal governments. I'm going to tell you, my tribal government was made to sign corporate mining. That's why we have a Navajo Nation government. Because the United States wanted to, in 1923, sign corporate world to mine coal, to mine oil and gas, drill for oil and gas, and now uranium. That's what our government was based on in the way that it was made. And I always tell my people, it wasn't for us. It was for the development of the corporate world to make money. And so we have to remind ourselves, and working across the country with Native people across the United States and up into Lummi Nation, where they have oil companies, where forestry is being cut down, and they're saying we need to continue to teach that the canoes are our way of life. That's the way we're going to sustain ourselves. So they call it the gathering of the eagles, collecting their knowledge and their traditional knowledge and wisdom to try to protect the earth, sky, and water. I don't know how else to put it. And I find, like I said, I'm with the Pecos Institute. We're going to have a conference next year. And we've had a conference, and I met the Pecos Institute through Christian Reverse the Trend, and I've been with them, and I haven't been very active because of my illness. And so I'm just proud to see everybody on the list. Hang in there, keep moving, forge forward, no matter what it is. Gain knowledge, read as much as you can. We have to, my people used to say, the only way to infiltrate was to learn about them. So you know what their strategy is. And so a lot of our people have gone to college, universities, but we're losing our way of life, our traditional ways, our language. And it's hard. And so I'm probably one of the last generations trying to say this is important to sustain ourselves. And how do we teach our kids to farm and garden and to do these things? Because there's going to come a time this grid is going to fall. It's going to fall. All this AI, electronics and the internet, it's going to reach its peak. Everything caps out. And we're going to cap out, and there's going to be a whole new beginning of how to survive, and the people are going to be very few. That's my prediction. My Navajo elders, my medicine people tell me the same thing. We're on our own. We have to figure it out. Because our government people and the people that regulate the laws and policies are not going to be there to help us. We have to do it ourselves, for our own selves, for our families and our communities. It's very bleak. I'm sorry to say. We can be as educated and be as smart as we can, but sometimes the smartest people don't make the good decisions. Their head is too big. That much I want to say. I commend all of you. Forge forward, you young people. I think his name is, I see, Demuham or something.
Then Muhammad,
See
yes.
you. You're smiling, and I love it. I love young people. They're just beautiful people. And I see some from Asia and some from Africa. I love it. Hang in there. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Professor Esther Yazzie-Lewis, for your remarks. And thank you also for talking about the importance of youth empowerment as well on these issues. Next, we will hear from Susan Gordon, who's the coordinator at the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. Please, the floor is yours. Oh, you're muted, Susan.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just trying to get this into the right mode. There we go. So good morning. Thank you excuse me, Christian and the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation for this opportunity. I work for, this is, okay. Aha. All right. I just adjust my own PowerPoint thing here. I work for the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. This is a network of 4 groups in New Mexico that work on uranium mining issues. And so just to start with a little background, there are over 15,000 abandoned uranium mines in 9 Western states. This is the legacy of the nuclear weapons production and nuclear power. And the area that we mostly work in is the map on the right, which is showing New Mexico, and you can see the number of uranium mines in red that are showing up there. So one of the communities I work most closely with, excuse me, is the Redwater Pond Road community. They are located near Gallup, New Mexico, if you're looking at a map. And this is their residential area in the middle, but they are surrounded currently by 3 Superfund sites that are, 2 of them are are on the Navajo Nation's most contaminated areas that need immediate cleanup. So this is the Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation has over 1,000 abandoned uranium mines on their lands. Mostly, if you see the circle, or the, I guess it's not a circle, but a kind of a circle on the right, the Eastern Agency area, that's where we've pretty much focused most of our work. So I'm going to skip that slide. One of the challenges that the Redwater Pond Road community has had in challenging the cleanup plans and addressing the contamination is that there was this assumption that this community moved there to work on the mines. And then these are documenting that the community was there back in the 1920s, before the uranium mines came in. And so those mines would put in their shafts, and they would, their main shaft, and then they would dig their tunnels horizontally, and it often went under the villages where these folks were living. This is a bit about the mining era from the 1969 to 86. In New Mexico was one of the largest extractive places for uranium mine. I do want to say uranium mines, the uranium that was used in the Trinity Test and in the bombs that were dropped in Japan came from the Congo. It was not the uranium from the United States at that point. Not that it changes the devastation of those bombs, but there is a confusion about that. So again, this is showing another picture of Navajo Nation and the impacts to water in particular across the land. So in the circle in the right, it shows you the location of the Redwater Pond Road community. And there was a huge accident that happened there on July 16, 1979. And this remains the largest release of radioactive waste by volume in U.S. history. You can see this was a uranium mill tailings dam that breached and released millions of gallons of contaminated material and water that flowed 80 miles through Navajo chapters into Arizona. And I'm going to go back, and now you can see this map is showing the Puerco River and where all that water flowed into Arizona and through these other chapters. So the unfortunate thing about this is that it happened 3 months after the 3 Mile Island accident. And so at that point, the nuclear industry and nuclear power was really on the upswing. And the 3 Mile Island accident in the United States really created tension. And they downplayed what happened there and then completely ignored what happened on Navajo. I think two reasons. They wanted to continue to promote nuclear power as a safe industry, and having two accidents that close together would have been a problem. But also, this is on people of color land, right? And it hit the communities of color have never received the justice for the contamination that has happened through many industries in the US, but in particular, the uranium and nuclear weapons programs. There have been a number of studies, health studies, that have started, years after these accidents happen and the exposures. This is talking about the Diné, I can't remember what I guess it's just Diné project, where they are taking urine samples, blood samples, and are able to begin to track how folks are being impacted by their direct exposures to the remaining abandoned uranium mines, the mine waste, and the mill tailings piles across Navajo Nation. So this is also about that. If you're interested in finding more information about health studies that are ongoing, you can go to the Southwest Research and Information Center, sric.org, SRIC. And they have been conducting these studies with the National Institutes of Health. They're also conducting a Diné birth cohort. So they've been studying women throughout their pregnancies and impacts to children, because these health impacts are crossing the fetus and impacting babies that are born. And they just recently got a grant to extend their coverage of the babies that were originally part of this, I think until the age of 10. So that will actually help quite a bit in further documenting this. There's another health study that's going on currently looking at whether or not giving zinc to individuals will help to offset the impacts of heavy metals like selenium and uranium. Can the zinc help to decrease those impacts in people? Again, these are not easy studies. People are asked to donate, bodily fluids, and it's a very complicated process to get permission across Navajo Nation. And now also a Laguna Pueblo is starting to do some health studies. The Laguna Pueblo is the place of the Jackpile mine. At one point, that was the largest open pit uranium mine in the world. And many of the indigenous people in the surrounding areas, Laguna Pueblo, Acoma Pueblo, Navajo, and others, worked in these mines without being given any protections. As Esther mentioned, we have been doing an annual commemoration of the uranium spill day. They started in 2009. We just had one on Saturday. And it's 46 years since that spill happened, and it still has not been addressed. So this is a timeline of what we've been facing in terms of, how long it actually takes. So in 2002, there was a citizen study of radiation monitoring that was started. shortly after that, because they call it the Crump study, the Church Rock Uranium, I can't remember what the other letters are. Monitoring program. There we are, Crump. The results of that showed that there was still significant radiation in the area. And that was a few years later is when the US EPA began their own study. And they found that there were significant places of contamination in the Redwater Pond Road community. So they did 3 separate, what they call critical action removals. Each time the community members were moved out of their houses and into hotel rooms for 3 months, 7 months, 5 months. I mean, can you imagine living in a hotel room where you don't have access to a kitchen? Your children are still trying to go to school. These were significantly painful episodes for the community, but they were moved out so that the EPA could come in and scrape off the top of the contaminated soil and bring in some fresh soil to make it safer for them to live in. I will say that the haul route between the uranium mines and right through the middle of the village, the EPA had to go down 30 feet to get the most dangerous uranium contamination out. So it wasn't just like a simple, scrape around a house. It was significant in trying to remove these levels of contamination. And so Edith Hood is one of our elders at the Redwater Pond Road community. She testified before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights on the rights to water for Indigenous people. And this is one of her statements, that we've waited far longer than other communities in the U.S. for this poison to be cleaned up. When is it our turn to feel safe? And how many more generations have to wait? I'm sorry, I lost track of the time. Am I at time, Christian?
You're fine. You can continue, Susan.
Okay. So this is in the background. You can see one of the holding ponds that from the Northeast Church Rock Mill that was there. And this is the pond that actually breached and released the contamination. This is a picture from one of our commemorations a number of years ago. One of the great things is the community gives out free T-shirts each year, so we can track what year these things happen based on the color of our T-shirts. Let's see. All right. So I wanted to mention one other thing. So before I came to work for the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, I worked for the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. And ANA is a national network that works on, represents the communities that are located around the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons complex sites and their cleanup sites. So you can see by the radiation symbols, those are the largest of the nuclear weapons production sites. A number of them have been closed at this point. A few of them now are back. There is a buildup, as Mary was mentioning, to restart the manufacture of plutonium pits, which is the core of a nuclear weapon. And so these sites are a mix of places that need to be cleaned up. In the far left corner in Washington State is the Hanford Reservation. That is the site where a little more than half of the plutonium that was produced was created there. It's under a massive billions of dollars cleanup. And in the recent budget cutting scenarios, they are looking at cutting back the budget for continuing cleanup there. The Los Alamos lab, which is in my neighborhood outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, they're in the process of hiring like 8,000 new employees to work on building new weapon plutonium cores. You can see in this map, it's a little hard to see, but the gray sites that are outlined, those represent indigenous tribal land. Most of these weapons sites are located near water, and that continues to be an important part of production. And it's also a place that has been seriously contaminated across the country. New Mexico has very little water left, and yet, they're proposing new uranium mines under the energy emergency that was declared by an executive order by the Trump administration. We currently have 5 mines that are listed on their fast track, which would allow federal permitting, which normally takes years, to be completed in 28 days without tribal consultation, without public comment or input. We're fortunate in New Mexico that our New Mexico environmental agencies have very strong water protection standards. So even though these mines may move through their federal permitting quickly, they are not going to be able to do that at the state level. That is not included in the fast track. They will still have to meet that. So I think I'll stop there. It is, I think, a very scary time for our country. It is the legacy. There are contaminated and impacted communities all around all of these sites, and they have not received compensation. They are certainly entitled. It's another, as Mary was saying, people that were exposed and contaminated without being told, because the Manhattan Project, of course, was all secret. And I'll just give you one example. So there was a uranium processing facility at the Fernald feed plant in Ohio. So the yellow cake would be dug up and then sent to their facility to be enriched, to be used for nuclear weapons production. But because everyone was told, sworn to secrecy, this feed plant had a water tower that could be seen by the community. They painted it in red and white checkerboard, and that was the symbol for Purina animal feed. Your dog feed, your cow feed, all of it. So people just thought that the Fernald plant was an animal feed plant until Lisa Crawford came home one day and found a guy in a white moon suit climbing out of his well, and a group of housewives in Fernald joined together and forced the federal government to tell them that indeed this was a uranium plant, that their water, their wells were contaminated. And that community won the only class action lawsuit against the Department of Energy for the contamination. And after that, Congress passed a law to prevent communities from filing lawsuits against the Department of Energy for the nuclear weapons production. So there's lots more stories to share, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for your presentation. Next, we will hear from Dr. Ivana Nikolić Hughes, who is the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and she'll be focusing her presentation on the scientific and moral imperatives for nuclear abolition. Please, Dr.
I'm sorry, I can't get out of this screen sharing.
Oh, okay. I will let me replace spotlight.
Sorry.
It's okay. And then I will add even
You could stop my co-host sharing thing.
no, we're just removing you. There we go. So even now we are spotlighting you. So
Thank you.
so of course, Susan. So please, Dr. Hughes, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you and all of our wonderful interns for organizing this event. And of course, to the 3 previous amazing speakers. Mary, I think I've heard you just this year. This is not even over time. Just this year, I think I've heard you speak 3 times. And this may be the fourth, and each time you've had me in tears. And I know what you're going to say, and it still just breaks my heart every time. So thank you. Thank you for sharing such deep and moving insights on the nuclear age. Thank you. And same for Professor Yazzie-Lewis. I didn't hear you speak 4 times this year, but I've heard you speak before. And the voice and the message that you bring is so very important. We're so grateful to you for your dedication to these issues. And Susan, that was just the most informative presentation I've heard in a long time. And I hear a lot of informative things. I actually am sort of pinching myself. How did I not know about the Church Rock uranium mill spill? And I guess because they didn't want us to know. So I will learn more, but thank you I took a lot of notes. And I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing. But I think what we're getting here is, the impetus for this event was, of course, the 80th anniversary of the Trinity explosion. We're fast approaching the 80th anniversaries of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. I think it's important to sort of take a step back and recognize that really what we're marking this year is 80 years of the nuclear age. And the stories that you've heard are just a part of this tapestry of pain and devastation and suffering, because there is something uniquely devastating and destructive and damaging about nuclear weapons. So I'll come back to that idea. I also just want to point out that after the Trinity explosion, which I agree with Mary, the word test just doesn't do it justice. I think it gives people this, maybe we just like tested it in the lab and, sort of figured out whether it works. No, we went out and had these full-blown explosions, and as Mary said, over 2,000 of them all around the world. But after the explosions and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the United States was in the Marshall Islands, in Bikini Atoll, on Bikini Island in February. February 10th was a meeting of the community of Bikinians with a U.S. commander, at which they basically asked them to leave their islands for the good of mankind and to end all wars. This was 6 months after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the very first explosions in the Marshall Islands occurred in early July of 1946, making that a year. If Trinity was July 16th, within a year, right? All of these things happened within that very first year. And we've had 79 more years since then. The other thing, I want to say something on the positive side. And that's hard to do when it comes to nuclear weapons. But on the positive side, in that very first year, what we did have was the founding of the United Nations. So the United Nations were founded, and the charter, everything, this all happened in October 24th of 1945. And then just 3 months later, January 24th of 1946, so this is again within that same first year of the nuclear age, the first UN resolution was passed. And that resolution was actually called for establishment of a commission that would deal with the problems created by the discovery of nuclear energy, of atomic energy. They were calling it atomic energy at the time. And in that resolution, they basically called for the elimination from national armaments of not just nuclear weapons, but all weapons of mass destruction. And so here we are, in some sense, 80 years later, still going after the very first goal, that same goal that was set out in the very first resolution. So, and I'll just mention just on this didn't happen in the very first year, but just in the kind of spirit of being a little bit hopeful, that it was within less than 15 years after what took place in the summer of 1945, the UN passed another very important resolution. It's Resolution 1378, and you can look it up. And that resolution was actually co-sponsored by all, at the time, UN member states. That resolution was passed on November 20th of 1959, and it called for general and complete disarmament. And so here we are again, from that time, 65 plus years later, still talking about the goal of disarmament generally, and then nuclear weapons specifically. But I want to go back to nuclear weapons and just share a few basic facts that I think everyone in the world needs to know. And then I want to just say a little bit, since Christian mentioned that I would also include kind of, a scientific perspective here, a little bit about what we know. You've heard some of what nuclear weapons have done, but I also want to say what nuclear weapons could do today, tomorrow, in a week, in a month, in a year, in 10 years. And so I want to just sort of describe to you the threat that actually we face each and every day, that these weapons continue to exist. So, basic facts: 9 states around the world possess nuclear weapons. United States, it used to be Soviet Union, it's now Russia. United Kingdom, France, China. These are the 5 that are recognized by an international treaty called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT. They're recognized as nuclear weapon states, although they have a responsibility to disarm. And then there are 4 that are outside of the NPT. That's Israel, which Israel actually obtained nuclear weapons before the NPT. It's thought that they had the first functioning nuclear weapon in 1966. And then there's India and Pakistan, which also, like Israel, never joined the NPT. And then there is North Korea, which used to be a party to the NPT and then left it in 2003 and has built an arsenal. These 9 states possess on the order of about 12,500 nuclear weapons. Most of these are in the arsenals of the United States and Russia, but the other arsenals are all actually large enough to cause not just millions of deaths, but actually to cause global destruction at the global level, and really to cause the end of human civilization as we know it. Essentially all or most, let's call it most, because there are some here and there smaller bombs, but most of these bombs are far more powerful than the bombs that were used in 1945, the Trinity and Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. So we're not just looking at a much larger number of weapons, we're also looking at much more powerful weapons than what existed in 1945. And the other thing that happened, Trinity was basically, that explosion basically happened right on the surface. For Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these bombs were put on planes that were flown over and dropped above these cities. Today, we have delivery systems that at the push of a button, and then you can't recall them, can send them, using intercontinental ballistic missiles. You can send nuclear warheads from the United States to Russia and vice versa. And really, even North Korea can actually, using ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, they could use a nuclear weapon in any part of the United States. They can reach any part of the United States. And on top of this, these delivery systems can also carry multiple nuclear warheads. Some delivery systems can carry 10 nuclear warheads. So we're not just talking about one bomb being much more powerful than, say, a Hiroshima bomb. We're talking about you being able to send, say, I mean, you might want to, 10 nuclear warheads to New York City. You can also send that one ICBM can also direct them to different cities. So it's just one kind of press of instruction to send one ICBM, and you could be destroying, multiple cities or just creating unimaginable devastation and damage. So again, you've heard a little bit about what, and I'm going to use the words just testing because it wasn't just testing, but still it wasn't explosions, incinerating civilians and killing people, what that has done. And so given these numbers of weapons that we have now, given their enormous energy yields, there are people sort of study what would happen in case of a nuclear war. And one thing I'll tell you is that what we do understand with such enormously large arsenals, what we do understand is that nuclear weapon use of any sort would not just end with one nuclear weapon. What we understand from, and people have been doing this for decades, they call it war games. It's not a game. It's not funny at all. But what they do understand is the use of one nuclear weapon, like the explosion itself, turns into this chain reaction where you just have nuclear use and a full-blown nuclear war. And so what does that mean? What does a full-blown nuclear war mean? Well, we saw just weeks ago that India and Pakistan were having a very difficult few days in which people worried about whether there would be nuclear war use. And some people thought, well, oh, it's over there. We don't have to worry about it. They could destroy themselves. And it turns out that, yes, they would destroy themselves. Simulation of an India-Pakistan nuclear war estimates about 130 million people would die from the attacks themselves. If that doesn't just, break your heart right there, I have more, because the rest of us will be impacted as well. And we will be impacted because that nuclear war would create so many fires and so much soot that would go into the atmosphere, would block incoming sunlight, cause what scientists have now referred to as nuclear winter for over 4 decades. We've had this understanding since the early 1980s. Nuclear winter, which again, depending on the specific scenario, could result in temperature drops around the planet on the order of 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. And what that does is it turns this into a completely different planet. This is not a planet on which food grows as it does today. This is a planet on which agriculture begins to fail. And within 2 years, over 2 billion people die of starvation because of that India, Pakistan, what is referred to by so-called experts, limited regional nuclear war. In the case of US and Russia, the numbers are far worse. We're looking at 360 million direct deaths. It's basically the day of the bombing, and then there would be many more from radiation impacts and so on. And then over 5 billion people dying from starvation. So this is quite simply the end of human civilization as we know it, the end of the world as we know it. And some of these impacts could be even worse. Some of the longer term impacts would also include destruction of the ozone layer, which in and of itself would cause. So, sometimes people talk about, oh, you could actually go to New Zealand because New Zealand temperatures will still be hospitable to growing food and so on, and fish. And actually, even there, your exposure to UV, you'd have to live underground. So none of this is good. And it's really that kind of that scientific understanding that I think gives us, plus everything we've heard so far about how people have already been impacted by nuclear weapons. That all leads to what I think of as the one and only logical conclusion, which is that we have to eliminate nuclear weapons. We have to abolish nuclear weapons, we have to prohibit them, and then we have to eliminate all of them. And there's a little bit of, a second kind of good news from the UN. This is what the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is all about. And this treaty is something that we work to promote and implement at the UN, at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. This is really our focus. This is a treaty that in some sense is a kind of bookend to that first resolution of the United Nations. It is a treaty that is basically aims to abolish any and all activities having to do with nuclear weapons. And at the same time, it's a treaty that also aims to address the harms of nuclear weapons through the language that's used there is from nuclear weapons use and testing. But of course, we talked a little bit about why some of that testing language is problematic, but still you have it. It's an attempt, and there is a strong effort to address the injustices of really those over 2,000 nuclear explosions that have occurred around the planet. The treaty was negotiated in 2017 and opened for signatures from UN member states that year. It actually entered into force in 2021 when 50 states had actually ratified the treaty. At this point, we have 73 states that are states parties. That means they've basically ratified the treaty in their national legislators. But at the same time, there are 25 more states that have signed the treaty and are working on their ratifications. And so we are essentially at half of all UN member states. And really what we need is, the way I sort of see this is that the pressure needs to be put on the nuclear armed states, both from the outside, that means internationally through more and more states joining the treaty, but also from within those states, and in particular for those of us who are here in the United States, on the nuclear weapons possessors from the inside, putting pressure to say that enough is enough. The suffering has been ongoing. It continues. It must be addressed. But we don't want more suffering, and we certainly don't want the end of the world as we know it. And I'll just end on this note that nuclear weapons are certainly not the only thing that threatens humanity. There are other threats, but this is one where we created the problem and we can solve it. In some sense, it is quite simply a political decision that can be made, We also actually know how to dismantle nuclear weapons. Turns out in 1986, that's another kind of happy, optimistic thing. In 1986, we had 70,000 nuclear warheads. So in some sense, having 12,500 is certainly better than 70,000. It doesn't, it's still 12,500 too many, but it shows that it can be done. And we have to get back, I think, to a much wider and larger levels of awareness of this problem. People after the end of the Cold War have been kind of asleep at the wheel, not thinking about the threat. We have to get to larger awareness, and we have to push for humanity, for future generations, and in some sense, for all those victims of the nuclear age who never enlisted, as Mary put it, but have suffered so much. We owe it to them to achieve justice, but we also owe it to them to remove these weapons once and for all from the face of the planet. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hughes, for your remarks and for highlighting the importance of the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Thank you. Next, we will hear from a young person, Anderson Peck, who is a youth activist, intern with the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation and its youth initiative, Reverse the Trend, Save Our People, Save Our Planet. Anderson will be sharing about, we'll be focusing on youth perspectives on the Trinity Test. So please, Anderson.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, it's great to see all of you. My name is Anderson Peck, as Christian noted. I'm 19 years old, and I'm a youth activist with NAPF and RTT. Just to provide a little bit of context, July 16th marked the 80th anniversary of the 1945 Trinity explosion and the onset of the nuclear age. Not given any advanced warning, nor explain the effects of the explosion they had witnessed, those living within the radius of the Trinity site and downwind, many of whom hailed from the Indigenous First Nation communities, they suffered from cancer and other diseases due to the radioactive fallout. The need for nuclear justice measures for Trinity's civilian victims remains. But despite the continued imperative to provide remediations to the very first victims of the atomic age, the number of nuclear weapons has increased in my lifetime. As others have mentioned, the Trinity explosion was not only the beginning of the nuclear age, but also the beginning of a protracted legacy of nuclear injustice. That includes the displacement of indigenous communities and the exposure of downwinders to radioactive fallout. The people of New Mexico and surrounding states, the First Nations, they weren't asked, they weren't warned, and they were not evacuated. As a young person, I asked myself, how can a country that prides itself on justice ignore the suffering of its own people? Remediation efforts must be transparent and shaped by the experiences of those affected. As Mary noted, this month, Congress expanded the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, known as RECA. But before this, many had gone without health assistance, financial compensation, or even an acknowledgement of the devastation inflicted upon them for decades. No one who has suffered from radiation exposure should be left without coverage. As we reckon with the consequences of the nuclear age here in the US, I believe it's important to remain vigilant and working toward nuclear disarmament around the world. There are no winners in a nuclear age. As an NAPF and RTT intern over the past 2 months, I've learned about deep fractures in the international community's approach to nuclear-related conflicts. Only last month, the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General warned that, quote, the nuclear non-proliferation regime that has underpinned international security for more than half a century is on the line, end quote. Nuclear proliferation concerns and escalating tensions continue to sabotage efforts to ensure global stability. And against the backdrop of deepening geopolitical tensions and fragile ceasefire arrangements, youth, I believe, must denounce the present nuclear-related escalation, but we must also confront the full truth of American nuclear testing on its own people. The 80th anniversary of the Trinity explosion gives us an occasion for this much-needed raising of awareness. Acting on our growing distrust toward nuclear weapons, young people must position themselves as a resource. We must also demonstrate a commitment to cooperation with our civil society counterparts. At the same time, civil society must invite youth participation and meet them where they are. Social media presents a valuable tool to engage with youth on these issues in an accessible setting. And in preparing for this event, I created an Instagram poll on my personal account asking whether anyone had heard of the Trinity explosion. Nearly 70% of respondents, most of them between 18 and 20, indicated that they had never heard of Trinity, which I believe is deeply concerning. We are taught about the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but not the ones tested here in our own backyard. I believe that needs to change. Too many young people remain unaware of the event which ushered the world into the nuclear age, never mind Putin's present-day nuclear threats in Ukraine, or the true nature of Iran's nuclear program, which has come under military assault in recent months. Events like these provide a valuable medium for young people to practically engage with and better understand these issues. It is vital that younger generations come to realize the threat presented by these weapons and the consequences of their use. Let me close with this. Just a month ago, UN Secretary General Guterres gave remarks to the UN Security Council during an emergency session on the Iran-Israel conflict. We face a stark choice, he said. One path leads to wider war, deeper human suffering, and serious damage to the international order. The other leads to de-escalation, diplomacy, and dialogue. We know which path is right. Indeed, we do know which path is right. As we observe the 80th anniversary of Trinity, young people must serve as an active partner towards the latter. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson, for your remarks. I think it was quite useful that you shared the importance of youth engagement, and also you highlighted the need to educate young people about the Trinity tests. And it's quite astounding. I think you said that 70% of those who responded to your survey never heard about the test before, and that really, sends testament to the need to really educate young people on non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament issues. On that note, I would like to open up the floor for any questions, comments that our audience members may have for our panelists. You can put your questions. Oh, I see we have a question. John Morris, please.
Thank you very much. I'm in London. I'm at London at about 6:30. I've campaigned for years against nuclear weapons. I'm appalled to realize that I knew so little about what had happened in America. I knew what happened in Australia. I knew that Britain had tested bombs in Australia and in other places. I understand what happened to a number of servicemen who were used as test creatures. I know that the present government is increasing nuclear weapons and is looking to buy tactical nuclear weapons from America, which I'm just appalled by. We have a place in England called Lakenheath, and we understand within the last few days, possibly these nuclear weapons, these tactical nuclear weapons have been delivered to Lakenheath. But our present government, our present leader of the government, Keir Starmer, hasn't discussed the matter with Parliament, with his own party, with anybody. We still do not know if these tactical nuclear weapons have arrived in Britain. And it's something that I'm appalled by. I'm now 78. I've spent all these years campaigning in one way or another against nuclear weapons, and I'm still shocked to learn about what happened in America, because to us, we were living in our own little island with nuclear weapons coming from America, being helped from America, but not understanding truly about the testing. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Can
John.
I just respond to
Please,
John?
Mary. Yes.
John, you are not alone in not knowing what happened in America. The vast majority of Americans don't know. that's one of the hardest and most frustrating things as an activist, is just how little people know about what happened here. People will say to me, well, I knew we tested in the Marshall Islands. I had no idea we tested in the US. We tested 928 weapons here. They went across the entire country. There have been studies that showed they affected people in the Midwest, where most of our agriculture is produced. There was a whole book written about what happened to people in upstate New York from one test. So people just don't know. I think it's not taught here. People aren't learning about it. I really think there has to be a huge move to get it included in curriculum. And I know some college professors who are working on that, but people just don't know. And I'm always shocked when I talk how people say the same thing you did. I had no idea America tested on its own soil.
Christian, if I can just add, yes, yes to everything that both of you have said. And John, I just want to address this really disturbing latest news and just say that if the U.S. has really now transferred weapons onto UK territory for the first time since 2008, this will make 6 countries in Europe that have US weapons. The others are Belgium, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, and Turkey. So there are US nuclear weapons all throughout Europe. I mean, and you know, this notion that somehow these weapons are making these countries safer is it's really appalling. It's actually that's been the primary impediment, I think, to disarmament. This lie and deception of nuclear weapons keep us safe. I think all these weapons are doing is put us all at risk.
Thank you. John, would you like to expand on your comments? I see your hand is still raised.
I would, because obviously I come from Glasgow many years ago, and I campaigned in Glasgow about what was happening in Holy Loch, which is where the nuclear weapons from America first went, of all the places in the world, to have a place called the Holy Loch. And the reason the American government wanted to use Holy Loch was that it was near to Glasgow. The government at the time had offered them other sites, but they weren't close enough to Glasgow because the US government thought it was unfair to keep the sailors and various people who were working with these nuclear weapons on the Huntley and all the other missile, places to be away from civilization. So it was thought a good idea to use Dunoon and Holy Loch as the place for nuclear weapons. My sadness is that in Faslane and Coolport, we have hundreds of nuclear weapons. And I feel that possibly our nuclear weapons aren't good enough, and that therefore our nuclear weapons don't work well enough, and therefore we have to have new tactical weapons. And I mean, that to me is an absolute disgrace. I mean, we have spent millions and billions of pounds on funding these nuclear weapons in Scotland. In fact, the Trident weapon delivery system has been tested off the coast in America, has been found not to work properly at all. So it's absolutely bizarre that we have 219 weapons in Scotland which we find are not suitable enough, and that we have to have tactical nuclear weapons coming from America and by planes from America suitable for these tactical weapons. Sorry to take up all your time, but I thought it was very important to say these things to you. Thank you very much for all your work.
Thank you so much, Sean. Next, we will hear from, I see that Joanne DeFore has her hand raised. Please, Joanne.
Yeah, I have to applaud all of you for today. This was an absolutely amazing program. And as a former social studies teacher, I keep on saying, okay, I'm going to listen to this again and I'm going to take these intensive notes. But I don't think I'm alone in wanting to know the highlights of what you presented. And I wonder if there could be something like key points, because each of you were presenting key points, and there was some overlap, but for those of us who do some speaking and can share this kind of information, I mean, I'm going to do it for myself, but I wonder if it could be available just for other people. And also, I think we have an obligation because this is recorded and it can be played to other groups. I think we have an obligation of doing that locally. I mean, spreading your word around to the groups that we know. I'm sure you're already involved. I mean, your knowledge is probably well known within the groups you know. But if we could reach the ones that don't know, with this, if there's any way that could happen, I think that would be wonderful. But I do applaud you. This was magnificent.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And yes, it is a project that our interns will be taking up after the event. They'll highlight the main points and help with outreach as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And then I see that we have, speaking of interns, one of our interns has his hand raised. Dimish, would you like to ask your question? He's a young Kazakh youth.
Hi everyone. I want to thank all the speakers for the information they gave. It was very clear and important. And I have a question about public awareness, like we were talking about. How can young people get involved in raising awareness for the pushing the nuclear disarmament? It's important not in only America. There's in Kazakhstan as well. We had Palatin's nuclear testing, and they're all connected. And how young people can know about this more.
Can I suggest you contact someone who his name is Ali Sher. I'll get you his last name. He is an incredible young man who started an organization in Kazakhstan. He's a Kazakh and lives there, called Stop. And if you'll put your email to me, I'll send you his contact information. You definitely need to get in contact with him. He does lots of work on this. And he's 22.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have I think Michael Dola. You have your hand raised.
Christian, do you mind if I just, Christian, sorry.
I don't mind.
Let me just address Dimash's question. Yeah. I just want to say that, when I was your age, it was the first few years or just when I was your age was just about the first time that I came to the US on my own as a foreign exchange student, and I could communicate with my family by sending them letters, and I could call them on the phone once a week for 3 minutes. Clearly our way of communicating has changed very much that time. And to our own website, that the number of visitors to the website has literally, skyrocketed over even just the last several weeks since all the activities with Iran and Israel and so on. So we just need to keep getting that information out, and we need to talk to people. If you talk to your friends, bring them into, send them information about events, writing, articles, looking things up. There's so much information. People just sometimes don't even know that they want to look for it. But I think young people can especially help with things like social media and so on, to spread the word.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ivana.
Thank you. And next, we'll, I think, Michael, you have your hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me? It's a little bit loud on the street where I am. It's a real tremendous panel. I really appreciate everybody's contributions, and I guess I don't know what to say, but I'm devastated to know that we're a year after the Oppenheimer hype and movie, and it seems like we're no closer to a kind of, just think provincially, just a national movement against nuclear weapons that really has the same mass character as it did in the 70s and 80s. And that nuclear modernization is bipartisan. How could it be bipartisan? I have a sense of why, but do people have any account for, like, is there any daylight between the Democrats and the Republicans on this? I mean, Trump is very obviously, to me, he's a fascist. It's obvious. And he's much more like, he'll just be genocidal. But modernization, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, started really in earnest with Obama. And I read a story, I'll wrap it up, but like the New York Times piece of maybe from a couple months ago that went into different sections of America where the industries, whether it's the plutonium pits or the steel for the submarines, like the different congressional districts that are getting this money and that are, feeding families on nuclear holocaust was really depressing. It's not new, but it's just incredibly depressing how much it's sort of a part of the economy. And I really thank you for this. I just kind of, I don't mean to be so despairing, but just I just don't see any daylight. But if there are people, like in New York, we're very excited about the mayor. I'm curious. I don't know if Mamdani has said anything about nuclear weapons, but I'd be interested to get him on record about it. I don't think anybody has, but there has to be a new generation, as not a Democrat, but of people who are on that stage and are saying enough's enough, like someone was saying. But I just think it's too bound up with imperialism, and that's a whole other thing. Thank you so much. Thanks again. Sorry to ramble.
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much. I believe, Susan, you had your hand raised that you would like to respond.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I've worked on the nuclear weapons issues for a very long time, and we have always tried to approach it as a nonpartisan issue. And I believe we've made most of our progress under Republican administrations and also using environmental laws to constrain nuclear weapons production. So what's going on now is, you totally nailed it. At one point during the Manhattan Project, there were 600 different locations in the US that were involved in some capacity in nuclear weapons production. So they weren't all radioactive materials handlers, but they were, it was spread out across the country because it is a jobs program and you're sharing the money out there. I am just appalled that the nuclear weapons program has increased by $9 billion over the last 10 years. There is even more money based on the bill that was recently passed and signed into law on July 4th for the military in general, but for nuclear weapons specifically. And then just this week, my senator from New Mexico, Ben Ray Lujan, introduced a bill to require an additional $30 billion to go to the nuclear weapons labs because their buildings are not safe. They need, infrastructure to be improved, right? This is on top of the money that has already been earmarked. And at the same time, the money for cleanup at these weapon sites is going down. So I'm still shocked when I saw the story that Lujan had requested even more money for the nuclear weapons program. It is a jobs program. Unfortunately, there's a site in South Carolina that Lindsey Graham is the, grandpa for, and he just keeps coming up with new ideas for how to keep this jobs program going. And I just don't think that jobs is the reason that we should be allowing for continued nuclear weapons production, new plutonium pit production, etc. All of that resources should be put towards non-proliferation, cleaning up the freaking mess that's out there, and new ways to protect the environment, which I know is just not popular. It's stunning. I'm just going to stop.
Susan, I believe that Ivana would like to also respond.
Yeah, no, I really just want to underscore a point that Susan just made, which is that this, in principle, has been, in some sense, a bipartisan issue. And if it hasn't, it has to become an absolutely bipartisan issue. I recently did an analysis that I want to share with you. I think probably most everyone here has heard of the Doomsday Clock, which is released annually by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. This year's reading of the clock, which was announced in January, was 89 seconds to midnight, the closest that the clock has ever been. And I actually did this little analysis. The clock started in 1947, and I did an analysis. Its hands have moved back and forth closer and farther away from midnight over time. We're now the closest we've ever been. But over that time, what I found was that, and there have been, during this time, the 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans in presidential roles. So equal 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. But it turns out that under Democrats, the hands of the clock have moved by a staggering 19 minutes and 10 seconds, while under Republicans, or rather Republican administrations, have overseen a movement of the clock's hands away from midnight by a substantial 13 minutes and 39 seconds. So it actually, again, we shouldn't just think of this as a partisan issue. There's room to make progress even under Republican administrations. In fact, Reagan came into office being this Cold War hawk, and a lot of progress was made right then and there. So just again to underscore the bipartisan point and a somewhat more hopeful point that we can work on these issues under all political conditions.
Thank you so much, Ivana. If no one else in our group would like to respond to that question, comment, we do have one more question. I see that, and I apologize for butchering your name, but Michaela Lassie, I'm sorry. I know you've always attended all of our Zoom calls all the way from New Zealand, so thank you so much. And apologies for mispronouncing your name.
Yes, Malolele, Christian, and it's good to be here this morning. I'm a New Zealand-born Tongan in Aotearoa. So it's, even though I came late, so I apologize. It's good to be able to hear the presentations and also the talano and the kōrero and the conversations in regards to nuclear testing, because no doubt it's harmed a lot of my people back in the Pacific. And as we talk about Marshall Islands and what took place in the Bikini Atoll, I'm also aware of the language that is used in regards to the swimwear called bikini, knowing full well that what happened to Bikini Atoll in regards to the Marshall Islands and the nuclear bombing that took place. I also seriously, people need to reconsider to decolonize the language that they use, because it's really harming and really damaging to a lot of people. Even when I speak to to a lot of our Pacific people, they bear the marks that took place in regards to nuclear bombing and nuclear testing that took and that harmed our people greatly, and they're still suffering, as I've heard the word suffer. But even the people in Bikini Atoll are still suffering, and yet the swimsuit that people call bikini, it's really really deeply saddening for me that the language that is still being colonized needs to be decolonized. If we're really considering the seriousness of nuclear effects and the nuclear impact, amongst our people in the Pacific. It's very serious for me to learn, but also to hear and experience the stories from our people in the Pacific Islands. And I'm seriously thinking that the language that is being used needs to be decolonized. Whether people agree or disagree with me, that's fine. But at the same time, they really need to look at the language and decolonize it if they seriously know the impact and the hurts and the suffering that my Pacific people went through. And that's the comment I have to say. And it really saddens me that they still use that word bikini, knowing full well what happened to the people at Marshall Islands and Bikini Atoll. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for the time that's given.
Thank you. And I believe that we agree with you that the language needs to be decolonized. And it's unfortunate that language has also been gendered as well regarding nuclear weapons. I see that Ivana would like to respond to your comment, please.
Yeah, thank you, Makaleshi, so much for these very insightful comments. I just want to say, in case people didn't know, that the swimsuit design was made in the summer of 1946, following those very first explosions that I mentioned, which were done in Bikini. And the French designer didn't choose to name his swimsuit design after Bikini because it was a beautiful tropical island. He chose to name the swimsuit Bikini because he wanted the design to be explosive. And so the bomb it wasn't, oh, let's name a swimsuit after a beautiful tropical island. It was, let's name a swimsuit after an island we've bombed, where we exploded these awful, horrendous weapons. And let's have the swimsuit cause an explosion around the world. In this culture, it is absolutely, absolutely terrible. And there are other references in popular culture that we don't even recognize. SpongeBob is from Bikini Island. There's so much. I recently learned about. There used to be, Mary, you might know this. There used to be nuclear tourism in the maybe you can add, but there was like a poster of a woman who was wearing a mushroom cloud kind of swimsuit. So there's just too much and really a trivialization of something, so that we can sort of sweep it under the rug as the source of devastation that it really has been.
Yeah, nuclear tourism is really something. And they've tried to turn this whole issue, which is absolutely tragic, into kitsch. They had an atomic cocktail, and the promotion for it was have a blast. And they did have the woman wearing nothing but a mushroom cloud, Miss Atomic City. They had beauty pageants. They crowned beauty queens. They had a Miss Uranium City. Oh, and there was a photo of her. I just saw it in a museum in southern Utah. Her prize was a truckload of uranium ore. And the picture of her that ran in the newspaper was her hand in the uranium ore. So there's been a lot of kitsch around it that's really unfortunate. Really unfortunate.
Would any of our other panelists like to comment? If not, I see that we're about out of time. We're actually a few minutes over. So I would like to thank everyone for joining. And if it's possible, I would like to ask the panelists to stay on the call with our TIC team. So that's Tyler, David, and Anderson and Dinesh to stay on. And for everyone else, thank you so much. And have a pleasant afternoon.